Okay, hi everyone, welcome. Just making sure we're getting people in. I'm going to navigate away from this screen a little bit, I think. Zoom has done an update. I don't really know what it's doing. Let's just hope for the best. Hopefully you can see my screen. If you can't, please let me know. You can pop something in the chat box and that will come up for me. Just see if I've got everybody coming in. Beautiful. You just have to forgive me if I just jump out to let people in. All right, let's get started. So welcome. This afternoon we are talking about positive school transitions. So we'll get straight into it. There's a fairly big amount of content to cover in a pretty short space of time. So these sessions are about 45 minutes to an hour. Usually try and leave a little bit of time at the end for questions if you have them, but you can also pop them in the chat at any time as we're going as well. All right. Let's just hope this is all going to cooperate. I love when Zoom changes things. So first off, I'd just like to start by acknowledging the traditional custodians of country that we are on. I'm on beautiful, sunny, blue sky Awabakal country at the moment. Beautiful autumn day in Awabakal country, actually. And I'd like to acknowledge elders past and present and any emerging elders, as well as any First Nations people that might be joining us on Zoom. We strongly value our connection to First Nations culture and acknowledge that sovereignty has never been ceded. Okay. All right, so I want you to start. This is how I've been starting all of my online sessions lately, because I recognise that it can be really difficult to come from often working with children. You might have just been with a group of children and you might have stepped out to be able to do this session, or wherever you are, just to kind of get into the right headspace to be able to do professional development. It's really tricky with Zoom. I think you kind of just have to be on and ready to go. So I'd like to encourage you just to take a couple of deep breaths to start with, and then think about what you want to get out of the session, why you signed up for it, what you're hoping to kind of have by the end of it. If you're comfortable, you can share in the chat box anything that you're kind of hoping to get out of the session as well, but it's just a really great way to kind of get you in the right headspace for talking about positive school transitions. So a couple of basic things, just if you can keep yourself muted unless you're asking a question, that would be great, just so we don't have lots of background noise. And as I said, you're free to use the chat box function whenever you please. Just bear with me if I am trying to navigate in and out of tabs to do that. And if you can have your camera on, if you're in a place to do that, that's always encouraged as well. Makes us all feel like we're connected human beings, not just little squares on the screen. But I also acknowledge that that's not always possible for everyone, so whatever you are comfortable with. Okay, a couple of things about me for those that I might not have met before, virtually or in person. So my name's Nicole and I'm one of the co-founders of Inspired EC. I've been in early childhood now for well over 20 years in a variety of roles. I was a long daycare centre director for a really long time, and also I'm now an approved provider, trainer, consultant, all kind of hats, lots of different hats at times. I've got 3 children of my own who are all now in school. So I've got a 14-year-old, a 11-year-old and a 9-year-old. So they're all in school. So I've done the transition to school thing with all of them. So I definitely put on both my educator and my parent hat when talking about positive school transition. So you'll probably hear that throughout. So that's just a few basic things about me. I'll have my contact details at the end as well. If you want to get in touch at any time, you can do that too. I like this just as a place to start, because this terminology of school readiness is probably something that most of us would be familiar with. It's a term that kind of gets thrown around a fair bit, that idea of school ready. I prefer positive school transitions to school readiness, because there are some children that are just never going to be ready, and yet they still will have to go by our traditional kind of definition of ready. And that's why I actually like this little quote. This is from Explorations Early Learning. And it says, school readiness seems to mean pushing 4-year-olds to behave and think like 6-year-olds so they do well on tests when they are 10-year-olds. What if it meant pushing schools to be ready for kindergartners with developmentally appropriate and play-based learning opportunities? And I think that's, I definitely come from the perspective of pushing play up rather than accepting that academics will get pushed down into school. So that's definitely something that I will talk about at length. Okay, so a couple of really basic facts about starting school. So children develop at different rates and they learn skills in different ways. It is the school's task to respond to the needs, learning styles, and rates of progress of individual students. Schools also plan learning experiences based on the skills students bring to school. That's from the New South Wales Department of Education, and what I really like is that little section in the middle that says it is the school's task to respond to the needs, learning styles, and rates of progress of individual students. So it's not about saying that all children must be at this level before they start school. That's, I think, what traditional school readiness probably taught us. There's lots of checklists and, you know, they need to be able to do X, Y, and Z before they start school. I think now schools typically are far more accepting that children are going to be at different stages and different rates. However, I was talking with a colleague the other day about how that sort of is the case when they first start, but then they're expected to get up to speed pretty quickly. So we're still kind of trying to push that play and that acceptance of children being in different stages further on into school. School involves a key transition for all children. This transition is not just to school, but from home, childcare, preschool, and kindergarten. So that's something that I always encourage educators to think about and for families to think about as well is, yes, we're talking about a child going to a new place. They're going to this exciting, big, new, scary, whatever words they use, place, but they're also leaving a place. You know, and whether that place is home or, you know, in our instance, it's likely to be, you know, preschool, childcare, you know, our kindergarten services, whatever we're leaving, they're actually leaving that space. They're leaving something that's familiar, that's comfortable. Hopefully they've had that strong sense of belonging. And so that can be a really challenging time for children too. So I think it's about acknowledging not just how we get you ready, you know, in inverted commas, ready to start school, but how we support you in the recognition that you're leaving somewhere that you're also really comfortable and that you've enjoyed being. Some children are more than ready to leave. They're excited and they're like, see you later, you know, they'll wave goodbye as they run out the door for the last time and you're left there thinking, well, they're not even going to miss me. Other children find it far more challenging. I had a child one year who, and this is where we'll talk about it a little bit more later, but this is where the way we talk about school can have a really big impact on how children feel about starting school too. So a child that I had in care, we hadn't really given it a great deal of thought, but everyone had been sort of saying, oh, we're going to miss you. And, you know, not just to this child, but to all the children, oh, we're going to miss you so much when you go to school. Oh, who's going to help me feed the chickens? And, you know, oh, I'm going to be lost without you, you know, like this real kind of, and for us, it was, we were trying to express, hey, we love you here and we'd love to still have you here and we will be sad when you leave. That's true. But what that child heard was, I can't go. And the day that he finished with us, he was devastated. He was in tears and he's like, I can't leave you. Who's going to help feed the chickens? And, you know, he got really emotional about it. And so we had to reflect as a team on the way, you know, we spoke about school and making sure that, yes, children were being supported. Yes, they were being told that they were loved and we would miss them, but also that we spoke really positively about what was to come and, you know, reassured them that they could come back to visit or, you know, all those kinds of things. So it's thinking about that as a whole transitional process rather than just the place that you're going. So again, we talk transition or readiness. So this is from the Queensland Department of Education. It says the following elements and associated activities are important in shaping successful transition to school approaches. Orientation helps children and parents become familiar with the school setting and administrative matters such as how to enrol, uniform, stationery requirements. Transition is meeting the individual needs of children and families, tending to be longer term depending on the child or parent's needs, and includes mutual information sharing between children, parents, early education services, and teachers. And then the other element is understanding each child's unique capabilities, recognising and building from each child's skills and capabilities to support continuity of learning and a sense of belonging. So I just think that's really important, to kind of look at those different elements. So we often talk about orientation, and I know it's funny, my dad talks about it. So my dad's almost 75, and he talks about when he started school, and they didn't do childcare and preschool, and he was at home with his mum and siblings, and when he started school, it was literally, he said, I don't even remember going there before we started, and he was the oldest child, so he hadn't been with siblings or anything. It was just he arrived and he started school. And he said it was such a shock to the system. He said, it was just literally one day you're at home and the next day you're in this other place, and there's this whole different set of rules and you're wearing this uniform, and, there was all these things. And he said, to compare that now to even when I started school, so, I'm 40, when I started school, it was very much you went and you had an orientation visit and then you started school. Now, children are getting longer periods of transition. I know someone said to me the other day that their child's school that they'll be attending starts orientations in September. And they said, oh my gosh, this just feels so early. Yeah, it does feel early, but it's also helping to support them. One of the things that my kids' school did was they didn't have the transition visits or orientations super early. They had them kind of October, November. But prior to that, when they had events on, so they had things like a circus day or they had a performance or whatever, they'd invite families who were starting the following year to bring their children to come and join in the community event. And it was a really great way for children to become familiar with the space, but also see it as a real positive as well. And that just formed part of that transition process. The same document also says about capability building. So it says that we strengthen the confidence and capability of families to support their children's transition, adopt classroom and school practices that place children at the centre of transition to school decision making, and demonstrate the capacity to promote the wellbeing of all children. They also talk about parental engagement and partnerships and relationships, which we know are very important in all aspects of care with children, but particularly when we're talking about transition, that is really valid. These little snippets can be really helpful for putting in parent newsletters if you're trying to talk to parents about transition as well. Participation in high quality early child care and education programs can also contribute positively to children's development during the early years and therefore to their school readiness. All right, big question for you. What do children really like to do? So you might be able to pop that in the chat. What do you think children really like to do? Play. We have a winner. Ashley, well done. You would get a Freddo, but I'm not there, so you're getting a virtual Freddo. Play. Children love to play. That's how they spend their time. And we know in early childhood that that's how children learn. It's how they pick up fundamental skills. It's how they develop relationships. It is how they explore the world. It's how they make sense of the world. It is everything, and we know that. And yet, when children go off to school, that's not always the case. So for us, we're very much about play in our early childhood years. Why is play so important? So a couple of the basics. Play enhances well-being. So when children have a strong sense of well-being, they're much more settled in the space that they're in. Obviously, we're aiming for high levels of well-being for children. So play does that. It allows children to make choices. That's something that's then going to be helpful later on in life, able to make decisions and make choices. When playing, children practice communication skills. So again, this is really valid and important for when children are starting school. It's language development, it's being able to negotiate and, communicate with other people, to ask questions. Those things all come up in play. When playing, children learn about how the world works. So all the ins and outs of the world can be discovered through play. They develop motor skills. This is really important if we're thinking about starting school, children going off to school. Often the question we get asked from families is, how is them playing going to help them learn to write their name, for example? And one of the things that I often will kind of talk to families about is the importance of gross motor skills when it comes to name writing. And you can see at first the response is like, oh, I don't understand why. But big body movement and gross motor skills help to strengthen the core. And we know that the body kind of develops from the core out. So children who have a strong core are better able to move their shoulders. Children who are better able to move their shoulders can better able to move their arms from their elbow. Then it works down to the wrist, works down to the fingers. And so, you know, if we're looking at children on monkey bars or climbing trees or swinging or rolling or, you know, all that big body stuff, we're looking at children who are building a strong core, who are then able to develop the other skills that they need to be able to develop the fine motor skills. So it kind of all has that big flow-on effect. Play allows children to navigate social situations. So, you know, in play, children can disagree with each other. They can work out who's going to be which person in the game. You know, it's like who's the mum, who's the dad, who's the dog, those kinds of things. They navigate all that sort of social stuff, which, you know, we know that social development is so important for children when they're starting school. And throughout our life, you know, we need social skills. Play inspires creativity, and of course, it is fun. So a little bit more research about play, and I really love this because I think it helps to for us when we're talking to families about their child starting school and what age they might start school. That can be quite a controversial conversation at times. I actually have, you know, 3 children, all born in kind of March, April. So we had the choice here in New South Wales. They have to be turning, they have to be at school before the year that they turn 6. So they can actually go, and that's by mid-year. So they could, my children could all have gone when they were 4 turning 5, or they could have gone when they were 5 turning 6. My eldest 2 went when they were 5 turning 6. My youngest went when she was 4 turning 5, because they're 3 very different children. But for some families, there is an assumption that earlier is better, or that holding their child back is problematic. And I hate that term, holding them back. I actually wrote a blog post about it. It's on our website, and it's called Why Holding Children Back from School is Actually a Gift, something like that. If you search it, you'll probably find it. But essentially, it's about reframing the school starting age for families so that they understand why it's important that children stay in play-based settings for as long as possible. So this little piece of research is a great one to share with your families, and it says the overwhelming evidence suggests that 5 is just too young to start formal learning. Children should be engaged in informal play-based learning until the age of about 7. The empirical evidence is that children who have a longer period of play-based early childhood education that goes on to age 6 or 7 finish up with a whole range of clear advantages in the long term. Academically, they do better, and they experience more emotional well-being. So that can be a really helpful thing to share with families who are unsure about, you know, keeping their child in, you know, childcare or preschool for a longer period of time. This is another little snippet that can be helpful. Young children's play allows them to explore, identify, negotiate, take risks, and create meaning. The intellectual and cognitive benefits of playing have been well documented. Children who engage in quality play experiences are more likely to have well-developed memory skills, language development, and are able to regulate their behaviour, leading to enhanced school adjustment and academic learning. So that can be a really good one to share with families who are questioning why you're doing all this playing when you should be getting my child ready for school. This can be helpful to kind of bridge that gap. And I think it's important to remember that the reason families often say that they want their children to be doing things that get them ready for school comes from a place of fear and love. So it comes from a place of, I want my child to do well. I want my child to be happy. I want my child to be safe. I want my child to be settled. I want them to be successful, all those things. I'm afraid that they will be help, they'll be disadvantaged, that they will struggle, that they'll find school hard, all those kinds of things. So we're trying to build them up so that they don't experience any of that. And so I understand where it comes from families, but that's our job then as advocates for children and for their play, to be able to give them the information that says, you know what, this stuff that we're doing, this playing in the sandpit, this climbing the tree, is actually really helpful for all of these things. Okay, so what does school readiness, and you'll notice I've got that in inverted commas because it's not the term I like to use, but if we were to talk about what a child might look like who is ready for school, we'll look at a couple of different areas. And so this information comes from the New South Wales Department of Education. Most states have really similar kinds of information. They might vary a little bit. And I know different schools will have different things that they look for as well. I know when my children started school, they had kind of like a interview session almost, where they did a few different, activities and whatever to determine where they were at. And so it wasn't about saying, well, they can't do this, but where are they at so that we can support them when they start at school. So the first one's personal and social skills, and I'd probably argue this one's the most important. Things like using the toilet independently. Now, of course, there are going to be children that will have to go off to school that may not be able to do that due to medical conditions, due to additional needs, diagnoses, etc. This is about, kind of looking at very typical frame of reference. So we're always going to accept that there will be children that will fall outside of these standards. That's why I'm not usually a huge fan of like a checklist as such, but they can help to give us a bit of a guide as to some of the things that we could expect children to be able to do when they head off to school. So use the toilet independently, can say their own name and address, adapts to unfamiliar settings and new experiences. That's an important one with transitioning to school, because it can be a really new experience, new setting. It can be a lot bigger. Now most of the schools, I believe, are fenced, but when I went to school, they certainly weren't. And they're really different. The toilet situation even is different. In preschool, we had just one big open toilet with a whole bunch of glass windows that everybody could see you like you're in a fishbowl. You go off to school and there are these big brick buildings, and there's a boys' side and a girls' side, and it's very different. So that adaptability and flexibility is a really important skill for children. They can finish a task, and I always laugh at this second part, tidy up afterwards. A lot of children struggle with that. A lot of adults struggle with that, so that's okay. Plays cooperatively with other children, can sit still to listen to a story for a few minutes. Notice there it doesn't say for like a 20-minute, 30-minute group time. It's like a few minutes. Sit still to listen for a few minutes. Most children can sit for a few minutes. Even infants can often, they often don't have a choice. They can't get away. But no, they will sit and engage with you for a few minutes. It's not about we need to all be able to sit down, listen to a group time that's teacher-led for half an hour to be able to start school. It's not required. Is curious about the world, can share an adult's attention with several other children. That's a really important one too, because children are leaving our care where they may have had obviously there's other children in the space, but there's also other adults too. So if I can't get one adult's attention, I can go and try another. There's often plenty of adults around that I can get that attention and connection. So it can be really challenging for some children when they start school and all of a sudden they've got to, share that attention with other people. Participates in imaginative play. That's another part of personal and social skills. Literacy, so talks to other people about familiar objects or events, uses books for enjoyment or looking at pictures, asks and answers simple questions, makes their needs known, that's a big one, follows simple instructions. So again, simple instructions like put your shoes on the shelf, not put your shoes in the shelf, then go and get your hat, then go and put sunscreen on, then go to the bathroom and wait outside. That's very long-winded instructions. So simple instructions. Uses a variety of things to draw, scribble and write, joins in singing familiar songs, identifies pictures in books, magazines, on television or video. So it doesn't say there must be able to write their name, must be able to read. It just doesn't say that. Must be able to know their ABCs. Doesn't say that. Now, a lot of children will have already absorbed the whole alphabet thing early on. Some children will go off to school being able to write their name. Some might not be able to write their name, but they can recognise their name. Some know individual letters. Some don't know any. They're all going to be at different stages. But I just like that this doesn't specify that that's what's required, and I think we get stuck on that being a requirement, or families often do. Mathematics, so recognises that numbers can be used to count, uses words such as many, more, a lot, and less, identifies things in a group that are different, sees difference in shapes, differentiates between opposites, up and down, under and over, in and out. Again, doesn't say there, needs to be able to count to 100, needs to be able to do long division. Like, none of that's there. So it's looking at these really broad skills. It's that recognition that numbers mean something. It's the same with letters. Like, they mean something. They're representative of something. That's all we're after for children in this really early stage. And they will absorb that through play. Plain and simple. They will absorb that through play. Physical skills, I always laugh at this first one too. Uses scissors to cut along a straight line. I know adults that can't cut along a straight line, so that can be a real challenge. Also be mindful of children who may be left-handed. I know with my youngest, I'd never really given it a great deal of thought, but I noticed she was having a lot of trouble cutting, and I wasn't sure why. Then we discovered she was left-handed, and the scissors that they had in her preschool room were right-handed, and so she was finding it really difficult to cut. She was either trying to use them with her right hand, and that wasn't working, or she was trying to use them with her left hand, and they don't cut, they just bend the paper. So that's just something to be mindful of. Make sure you've got scissors that are suitable for both-handed preferences. Enjoys a variety of indoor and outdoor play, can put on and take off their jumper, shoes and socks independently. That's a really important skill. Children need to be able to do some of those basic things independently. Open their lunchbox, put their jumper on, take it off, really basic stuff. Doesn't mean they need to be able to tie shoelaces, but at least get their shoes on. Those really basic things are more where we need to focus our attention, supporting children. And often that's not about direct instruction. It's about giving them time and space to practice those things rather than us rushing in and doing them for them. And makes and designs things using a variety of materials, and that's often very common in early childhood settings. So how can we set up the environment to support skills and transitions? So things like dramatic play, we can have clothes with buttons, dress up shoes, phones, old computers. In blocks, we might add things like measuring tape, so we've got number coming in, paper, clipboards, drawing materials, signs, rulers. In art, one of the things that we did for a while was had some name cards, and so it had the child's name on it in like a New South Wales Foundation script, had their photo next to it, and we laminated them. And so then when the child wanted to be able to write their name on their artwork, they'd go and find their photo, that'd have their name next to it. We'd have those conversations about that is you, that's your name. And so they'd learn to be able to kind of copy that and what those letters look like and whatever. So that was a really good way to support that, just a nice practical strategy. Label everything. If you can have the photo and the word, that's even better, because children then start to put two and two together and go, well, that's that thing, that's a photo of that thing. Those letters obviously equal that word, and so they're starting to make sense and make connections that words equal things, it actually means something. Outdoors, we can have lots of loose parts, stones, pipes, sticks, logs, things that you can weigh, mix, measure. Loose parts is great for this type of play. And we can have different interest areas in our space. We can add lots of books, drawing, writing materials, etc. So there's lots of really basic things that we can do without actually going, we need to have school readiness activities. We actually just thread it through everything we do. We're always thinking about the skills that we're developing. So these are just a few examples. So this is at Adamstown Community Early Learning and Preschool, and they had a home corner restaurant that the children had created, and they had some menus there. They also had the cash register. They had an order for taking clipboards for taking orders, so they could actually write the person's order down. So again, they're learning that writing serves a purpose. If I put this thing down, it's so that we know what to make you. And they also had magazines and newspapers to read if you were eating on your own, which I thought was a very nice touch. Another example of, children being sort of exposed to that kind of pre-literacy stuff. This was at Kinmar Preschool down in Sydney, and it was children signing themselves up for a bushwalk, so they could add their name to it. Now, obviously, your children who can write their names will write their names. Younger children can just make a mark on the paper. Obviously, this wasn't the official excursion form that they used, but it was a great way for children to recognise that their writing and their mark making served a purpose. All right, documenting school readiness. So when we're analysing observations, we can link them to school readiness skills. So we can use that information from the Department of Education or from a local school. You can use things from an article. You can, as I say, each of the states will have their own kind of information and guidance for families or for early childhood services. And I recommend definitely having a look at those. But being able to link to them in your documentation makes the learning visible. So one of the biggest challenges we have with our families not understanding the whole positive school transition thing is that we're not making it visible. We're not making it obvious what the children are learning when they're playing. So documentation is our opportunity to do that. Obviously, we can do that in lots of other ways as well. We can have conversations with families. We can invite them in for like an information session where we can talk about play and school readiness. I've actually done a session for an early childhood service, and I went in and kind of gave a version of this sort of session, but it was geared towards families. And so it was really about educating the families on how play, particularly outdoor play. This was a service that did a lot of outdoor play. So it was about how play and outdoor play was actually supporting their child to develop really important skills for when they transitioned off to school, and what the families could do to support that too. So there's lots of ways that we can kind of document and advocate for these sorts of play-based positive transitions. So some other things you might do is have some examples in, if you have individual portfolios or you take work samples of children, you could include that. When we're displaying documentation in our space, you might have a little section on there. I know lots of services link to the learning outcomes. They might link to particular theorists. You can also just have a little section, on your documentation that talks about school readiness, or, how we're supporting those school skills or life skills. Involve children in the documentation process. This is where I love Claire Warden's talking and thinking floorbook approach, because children are directly involved in documenting their own learning, which then becomes it's like one of those loop things. It becomes a school readiness skill on its own, because they're cutting up photos, they're writing, they're drawing, they're contributing. So it's kind of like does multi things that. And where possible, share documentation with families and the schools. So, actually, particularly if you've got concerns about a child starting school, whether that be that you're concerned they're going to find it challenging, or how they're going to settle in, or whatever that might be, it's really important though to talk to the family first about these concerns, make sure they're on the same page, and then with their consent share that with the school. I actually had an experience where we attempted to share that with the school. The school at that time did not really want to know about that, and this child had a really challenging time. So I think where you can advocate for that and really speak up for a child using documentation of what's happening in their time in your service, whether that's through whether you're using checklists or whether you're just doing running records or little snippet observations, whatever. Being able to collect that information and then share it can be really valuable for some children. When it comes to documentation, remembering that educators use a variety of strategies to collect rich and meaningful information that depicts children's learning in context, describes their progress, that's important, and identifies their strengths, learning dispositions, skills, and understandings. So that's just a bit of an example of kind of a floorbook sort of approach. And as you can see, those children are really involved in that. They're cutting things up, they're gluing things in. If you want to know more about that, as I say, I'll give you my details at the end. You can get in touch about that approach. Okay, talking to families. So we're documenting and we're sharing all of that with families, but there's also going to be some probably bigger conversations that we need to have, particularly when we've got families who are questioning or challenging the way that we do what we do. How are you getting my child ready for school? That's often the question. How do we then talk to those families? So some big things to note: be an advocate for the child's right to play. We know that children have the right to play. It's actually in the United Nations Rights of the Child Convention, so that's kind of important. Advocate for that, speak up for that, explain why the child has the right to play. Be upfront at enrolment. So this might not be your responsibility. Often it falls to a nominated supervisor, but that might be you. But it's really important that from the very beginning, even down to like our marketing material, that we're upfront with families about what to expect and what not to expect. So many years ago now, I was at a local market day or something, and there was a new service that was opening up, and they were advertising at this market day. And part of their advertising is that they would guarantee your child will be able to read before they go to school. And that made me really uncomfortable for a number of reasons. One, I feel like that's just not something you can guarantee. But two, that's not what children should be doing at that age. Their brains aren't ready. Yes, some children will learn to read because they're gravitating towards books and, they're fascinated by words and language. But the vast majority of children simply are not ready to be reading. There is some research that suggests that the brain's not ready until about the age of 7 to actually learn to read, and yet children are learning to read much earlier. And again, it's not because they're necessarily not capable, but I think we do push them a little bit too early. So it'd be nice to push that back a little bit. But back to being upfront in enrolment, I tended to be the flip side of that. So as a director, I was really clear with our families from the minute they walked in the door, we play here. Our school readiness program is play. Like, we don't sit down in the afternoons and do, fine motor activities because it needs to get you ready for school. We don't get out worksheets. You won't see stencils, flashcards, etc. It's just not happening here. It's not how we do things. And if families weren't comfortable with that, that was their opportunity to say, you know what, that's not what I'm looking for in a service. And while that's disappointing, it also warded off some of those long-term battles that we tend to have with families. It was just us making it really clear from the get-go, and our philosophy supported that as well. So that's really important. That leads into the next one: use your service philosophy and policies. So have a really clear policy around, positive school transitions. Talk about the role of play and, transitions and connection and relationships and whatever in your philosophy, and that helps to back up what you're doing in practice. Refer to the early years learning framework. So nowhere in the framework does it say we need to be doing stencils and teaching children to write in the early years. It talks about play. It talks about supporting transitions. It talks about, relationships and connection. Talks about supporting children to develop skills and, to explore at their own rate and all those sorts of things. But it doesn't say they need to be able to learn to read and write. So refer families back to the EYLF. That might be putting little snippets in your newsletter. It might be adding sections to your documentation. Look beyond the learning outcomes. Some of the stuff that's in, the principles and practice section of the EYLF is really valuable as well. So, look to some of those sections to kind of back up why you're doing what you're doing. And invite families into the service to see the learning taking place. So as I said before, a lot of the hesitation or the concern that we have from families comes from a place of fear and love, but it also comes from not knowing. I often say to services, we can be really tough on families sometimes, and they think that all we do is this. Well, they do think that because when they come in the morning and the afternoon and they're there for 5-10 minutes, that's what they see. That is all they see. They don't see that big stretch of day when children are engaged in play. They see the chaos of, drop off and pick up time. So, where possible, inviting families into the service just to see what we do. Now, that can be really challenging. I recognise that because families are often working. But But just putting that out there, particularly if you've got a parent who's really finding it difficult to kind of understand why play is valuable, having them spend some time in the service can really help. Sharing documentation, as I said, and then maybe having an information night. You can invite a teacher from a local school. You might want to have conversations with them first so that you're comfortable with their take on it, because that will vary between teachers and between schools. So, I find the vast majority of teachers will say roughly the same thing, which is we don't need you to teach them to read and write before they come. We just want them to be curious and, have some self-help skills and some social skills and, those kinds of things. We want that, and then we'll teach them to read and write, because one of my children's teachers actually said sometimes it's hard. We've then got to undo the jolly phonics because we're trying to learn a different way. So, just have a conversation. If you're going to invite a teacher in from a local school, have a conversation about what works for them, what they're looking for in their service. And that goes for all the schools that your children might feed into. It's great to have those conversations and get an understanding of what they're actually looking for, what they're telling families as well. So then why families have got this idea. Why do they have the idea that you need to sit and learn flashcards? Where did that come from? This is a really great example. This is from a handout that was created by a service called Manifu Park, and I really liked it because they gave it to families. It's just some snippets from it. It's not the whole thing. There was lots more information, but I really love these little snippets. So the first one is, when will my child be taught mathematics? Children learn math skills through everyday interactions within our programs. Our educators will not sit with children and teach them addition and timetables by rote. Rather, simple games and conversations with children are created into teachable moments. Playing with large trucks in the sandpit can teach a child spatial awareness as they distinguish the size of the truck and the space they can manoeuvre in. Pouring water from one container into another increases a child's understanding of volume. Setting the table for lunch exposes children to the idea that numbers relate to counting. Learning is reinforced through these everyday experiences by our skilled and qualified early childhood educators. So I really like that explanation. It says what we will do and what we won't do, rather than, trying to kind of waffle on. It's very clear. We won't do X, Y, and Z. This is what we'll do instead. So I love, I'll do the when will my child learn to write one. It is natural for a child to develop a desire to learn how to write during the kindergarten year. This is Victorian Service 2, so it's the year before school. As they have probably been exposed to written language from a young age. Learning how to write their name can ignite the imagination of a child about this secret form of communication that adults use. By capturing this sense of wonder and curiosity, educators are able to introduce important emergent writing skills, providing a strong foundation to build on. So again, it doesn't talk about we will sit down and get your child to hold a pencil and they'll trace out letters. Like, we're just not doing that. We're actually just letting them explore. So I just think that's really helpful, those sorts of things, being clear with families, but also pointing out some of the play-based things that children are engaged in and how they actually support that transition. So why is a positive transition to school important? So this is from the EYLF, the new version, page 24, and it says, as children make major transitions to new settings, including school, educators from early childhood settings and schools commit to sharing information about each child's knowledge and skills so learning can build on foundations of earlier learning. All transitions offer opportunities and challenges. Different places and spaces have their own purposes, expectations, and ways of doing things. In partnership with children and families, educators ensure that all children have an active role in preparing for transitions. They assist children to understand the traditions, routines, and practices of the settings to which they are moving and to feel comfortable with the process of change. So, for us, I've kept that little quote. I must have liked that. I've kept it in there again. For us as educators, we can build some really valuable connections with local schools that help to support that transition for children. So some of the things that we can do that support the connection is go to the schools, take photos, create social stories, create little books, put them in your book corner. We started out by doing that for a child who had quite a lot of anxiety about starting school. And so we actually went to the school, took photos of things like, here's a photo of the bubbler. That's where you get a drink of water. Here's a photo of the canteen. That's where you can get an ice block. here's a photo of the bathrooms, you know, this is the boys' bathroom, this is the girls' bathroom, like just down to every last little kind of bit and piece, so that he could revisit that again and again and again as he prepared to go off to school. And he did almost daily. Starting to lose my voice. Meet with teachers to share information. So as I touched on before, obviously we're doing that with parental consent, but it's really valuable where we can, particularly when we've got children we're concerned about, or, you know, we think there's information that the school needs to know. Some children, it's like they will just waltz on into school like they own the place, no concerns. But yeah, I think where we can share information, that can be really valuable. When playing, I don't need that bit in there. Talk positively about school. So that one's just a rogue little section. Talk positively about school. I touched on that earlier, you know, with that child who got really upset. We want to make sure that children see school as an exciting opportunity, even if sometimes we know that, you know, it's the end of play, you know, like we might feel a little bit despairing that they're going off to school. We might miss them, you know, there's all those kinds of things, but we want for children to feel like this is a comfortable, safe place to be. There's going to be exciting things happening here. There'll be new friendships to make, you know, all those kinds of things. So, you know, try and be mindful. I used to work with an educator at one point who used to say, you won't be able to do that at big school next year. You know, oh, no, you can't do that because you won't be able to do that at big school. And I used to find that really frustrating because I thought, one, we're not at big school now, so it doesn't really matter. But two, you're making big school sound like an awful place where you're not allowed to do anything, you know, and we don't want that for children. So talking positively is really important. Invite children to come back and share. So you might invite some children who've started school to come back and talk to other children about what school is like, you know, what did they enjoy about being at school. Connect through the use of IT. So Adamstown Early Learning, which I showed some photos of theirs before, actually started a program with a local school, and they used to connect via Zoom, and they'd join in on some story times. And it was a really great way for them to participate. It became really interactive. And yeah, it was a great way to kind of connect with schools, and, you know, they'd often see siblings in the classroom on the screen. They'd be like, oh, there's my brother. But it was really about community and connection. It's great if you can actually visit the schools, as we've got up the top there, you know, it might be for a special occasion. We used to take our children, we'd get invited for things like the hat parade, Easter hat parade, or cross country, or, you know, different events. So not just for the orientation stuff, but actually going for other occasions as well. That helps children to become familiar with the space. I think that's why my youngest child was so eager to get to school, was because she'd been going there with her brother and sister for so long at like pickups and school events and whatever, that it felt like her space already. So that's what we want for children, to feel comfortable and safe in those spaces. And invite schools in to share with families. So as I said before, you know, actually inviting the teachers in to talk to families about what to expect when their child starts school and how to help, you know, support them through that transition. So we need to remember that our focus should be on creating a positive transition to school, not on ticking off a checklist of what children can and can't do. So while we might look at some developmental milestones, we might look at some skills development, it's really about the positive transition. You know, there will be, as I said at the very beginning, there will be children who go off to school who probably aren't ready, but they have to go. You know, we have legal requirements in Australia around the age that, you know, children have to be enrolled in school. And so whether they're ready or not, they're going. So if that's the case, then let's make sure that experience is as positive as possible, so that then when they go, it's not scary, it's not, you know, a negative experience for them, it's not too challenging. You know, that's what we're really aiming for, that positive experience. And it's a positive experience for everyone involved. You know, it should be a positive experience for families as well. So just remember to keep that focus on the positive transition rather than whether we're ticking off the ready box. And when families are talking about it, you know, and they're saying, are we ready? You know, is my child ready? Having that conversation with them. You know, it's not about being ready. It's about supporting them, you know, to kind of transition into that new space. And so, yes, there'll be some skills development. Yes, there'll be some things that we might practice or whatever, but it's not about ticking off, can they read and write? You know, that's not our focus. All right. So that was a lot of information. It's a topic I could talk about probably till I'm blue in the face. As I say, I've had my own children go through that transition process as well, and learnt lots of things as a parent that I probably think about differently to when I was working as an educator before children. So I want you to think about what you hoped to get from the session, whether you got that, but also too, if you're comfortable to share in the chat box one thing that you want to implement or change or work on or think a bit more deeply about in the coming weeks. It's not about saying I need to go and change our entire approach to positive school transitions, but it might be I want to include more about how it's supporting children with school skills on documentation, or I want to share information with families via our service newsletter about how play is important for children in the preparation for school, or I want to update our family orientation book so it's really clear, what we do, our approach to positive school transition. So if you're comfortable sharing something in the chat box, that would be lovely. It's always nice to see what people are sort of thinking about, what you might take away from the session. We all tend to take different things, which is great. And, even if you just take one thing and it's something to think about or something that you want to follow up on, read more about, whatever, then I think that's a success. Okay, so I'm going to pop my details there for you. If after the session you go away and you start thinking about it, or you start trying to implement some change, or you're kind of just going, oh, what was that thing? You're more than welcome to get in touch. You can flick me an email, and I'm happy to get back to you about that. If there's anything that we sort of talked about in the session that you want more information on, I can forward that on to you as well. Sometimes I'll say things in a session, I think, oh, I'll send that out with the notes, and then I forget. So if there is something in particular, that's the best way, is just send me an email and I can get that through to you. Other than that, I hope you've enjoyed the session. If you've got any questions, now is a great time to ask. Otherwise, I'll let you get back to your afternoon, and hopefully it's an afternoon filled with play. Thanks, everyone. Oh yeah, nice one in the chat. The importance of play in preparing children for school and sharing this with families. Excellent. This one. Thank you. Thank you all. Okay, hope that was helpful. I'm going to kick us all out now. Have an amazing rest of your afternoon.